In a quiet town, a young boy selling lemonade to save his own life found himself face to face with Morgan Freeman. What unfolded next was a moment so powerful, it would inspire millions and restore faith in the human spirit. The late afternoon sun bathed the small Georgian town of Willow Creek in a warm, golden glow. This charming town, nestled amidst rolling hills and sprawling oak trees, moved at a slower pace, its narrow streets lined with wooden homes and wraparound porches. The scent of freshly baked pies and blooming jasmine lingered in the air, mingling with the faint sound of children laughing in the distance. For most, it was an ordinary town filled with ordinary lives. But today, on the corner of Maple Avenue, something extraordinary was beginning to unfold. Seated at a makeshift lemonade stand was 10-year-old Jack Daniels, his small figure barely visible behind the colorful sign that read, "Lemonade for Life. Help me. Beat cancer." Jack's pale complexion and thin frame bore the signs of his battle with leukemia, but his smile radiated a warmth that drew the attention of everyone who passed. His determination, etched in every stroke of the hand-painted sign, was enough to stop a few cars and bring neighbors out from their homes. "Fresh lemonade, only $1, Jack called out, his voice carrying a mix of innocence and resolve. Though his hands trembled slightly from exhaustion, he carefully poured the lemonade into cups, his joy unwavering with every customer who stopped to buy a glass. A woman pushing a stroller stopped by, her toddler giggling at Jack's cheerful greeting. She handed him a $5 bill. "Keep the change, sweetheart," she said, her voice tinged with emotion. "You're an inspiration." "Thank you, ma'am," Jack replied, his smile broadening. His mother, Emily, sat on a nearby bench, her eyes filled with both pride and sorrow. She watched as her son, despite his fragile state, worked tirelessly to raise funds for the mounting medical bills that threatened to overwhelm their small family. The lemonade stand wasn't just a project. It was Jack's way of fighting back, of holding on to hope. What neither Jack nor Emily knew was that fate had something extraordinary in store for them that day. And it was about to arrive in the form of a man whose voice had narrated countless stories and whose presence carried a gravity few could ignore. The afternoon sun had started its slow descent when a sleek black car rolled up to the curb near Jack's stand. It was an unassuming vehicle, but what caught everyone's attention was the man who stepped out. Dressed in a simple white shirt and tan slacks, he moved with an air of quiet confidence. His face was immediately recognizable. Morgan Freeman. Emily gasped softly, her hand flying to her chest. "Is that?" she whispered, unable to finish the sentence. Jack, too, froze for a moment, his young eyes wide with both recognition and disbelief. Morgan Freeman approached the stand, his gaze sweeping over the colorful sign, the neatly arranged lemonade cups, and, finally, Jack himself. The boy's frail frame and the unmistakable courage in his eyes seemed to strike a chord in the actor. "Well, well," Morgan said, his deep, resonant voice breaking the silence. "What do we have here? Lemonade with a purpose?" Jack nodded, regaining his composure. "Yes, sir," he said, his voice steady despite his nerves. "I'm selling lemonade to help my mom pay for my treatments." Morgan crouched slightly, bringing himself to Jack's level. "That's a noble cause," he said, his tone warm. "And you're quite the young entrepreneur. How much for a cup?" Jack grinned, holding up a small paper cup. "It's $1, but people sometimes give more if they want to help." Morgan chuckled, pulling out his wallet. "How about I buy the whole pitcher?" he said, laying a crisp $100 bill on the table. The crowd that had begun to gather let out a collective murmur of admiration. Jack's face lit up, his excitement evident. "Really? Thank you, Mr. Freeman." Morgan Freeman smiled, but instead of walking away, he stayed. "You know," he said, his voice thoughtful. "I've seen a lot of lemonade stands in my time, but something tells me there's a bigger story here. Would you mind telling me why you're doing this?" Jack hesitated for a moment, his small hands clutching the edge of the stand. The crowd around him had grown quiet, waiting for his answer. He glanced at his mother, who gave him an encouraging nod, her eyes glistening with tears. "Well," Jack began, his voice soft but steady. "I was diagnosed with leukemia about a year ago. The treatments are really expensive, and I know my mom's been worried about money. I wanted to help, so I started selling lemonade." Morgan listened intently, his expression a blend of warmth and gravity. He crouched down further, resting his hands on his knees to meet Jack's gaze. "That's a lot of responsibility for someone your age," he said. "Ho, how old are you, Jack?" "8, Jack replied, his voice carrying a mix of pride and vulnerability. "But I don't want my mom to do it all by herself. She works so hard already." Morgan's eyes softened, and he glanced at Emily, who was standing nearby, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. He could see the weight of worry etched into her face, and the quiet strength she was mustering for her son. "That's a lot of love you're showing, Jack," Morgan said. "And love like that, it's powerful." The boy nodded, his small fingers nervously straightening the cups on the table. "I just want her to know I'm trying, you know? That I want to help." Morgan stood up slowly, his commanding presence drawing the attention of everyone around. "Well, Jack," he said, his voice resonant, "I think you're doing more than trying. You're inspiring people. And I think it's time we show you just how much good can come from a little hope." Morgan reached into his pocket, pulling out a crisp $100 bill. He placed it gently on the table, the corners of his lips lifting into a warm smile. "For a cup of lemonade," he said, his tone light but sincere. "And for the incredible effort you've put into helping your mom." Jack's eyes widened. He had never seen such a large bill up close. This is for me?" he stammered, looking up at Morgan with a mix of awe and disbelief. Morgan nodded, his smile widening. "It's for you, Jack. But I think it's just the beginning." The crowd around them murmured, inspired by the gesture. One by one, people began stepping forward, pulling out their wallets and dropping bills of all denominations into Jack's jar. Some handed over 10s and 20s, others left spare change. A few people wrote checks on the spot. The jar, which had been only half full that morning, quickly overflowed. Emily stood frozen, tears streaming down her face. She placed a hand over her heart, overwhelmed by the outpouring of kindness. "I don't know how to thank you," she said, her voice trembling. Morgan turned to her, his expression gentle. "You don't need to thank me," he replied. "This is Jack's doing. His courage and love brought everyone together. I'm just happy to be part of it." The energy at the lemonade stand shifted from quiet admiration to an atmosphere of celebration. The small gathering had turned into an impromptu community event, with people sharing stories, exchanging smiles, and encouraging Jack. Children from nearby stands brought over cookies and crafts to add to the fundraiser, inspired by Jack's determination. Morgan, still seated at the table, leaned closer to Jack. "You know, Jack," he began, his voice calm but resonant, "what you're doing here, it's bigger than selling lemonade. You've reminded all of us what it means to come together, to care for each other, even in hard times." Jack blinked up at him, his young face filled with wonder. "But I just wanted to help my mom," he said earnestly. Morgan chuckled softly. "And that's exactly why it's so powerful. Sometimes the simplest acts have the biggest impact." A local photographer who had been passing by stopped to capture the moment. The image of Morgan Freeman, seated beside a wide-eyed Jack at his stand, surrounded by a crowd of supportive neighbors, would soon become the defining image of this extraordinary day. As the evening wore on, the once quiet neighborhood was alive with chatter, laughter, and the steady hum of vehicles arriving and departing. The lemonade stand was nearly emptied of its supplies, with Jack pouring the last few cups for latecomers. His mother, Emily, stood to the side, her eyes misty as she watched her son's unwavering determination. Morgan remained by Jack's side, occasionally chatting with visitors and signing autographs when asked. though he always redirected the attention back to Jack and the purpose of the stand. When the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a soft amber glow over the street, Morgan stood and gently patted Jack's shoulder. "You've done well today, Jack," he said with a warm smile. "You've inspired more people than you'll ever know." Jack looked up at him, his face a mix of gratitude and exhaustion. "Thank you, Mr. Freeman, for staying, for helping." Morgan crouched to meet Jack's gaze. "No, Jack. Thank you. You've reminded me, and everyone else here, that hope and kindness are contagious." As the evening drew to a close, Morgan took a moment to speak privately with Emily. "I'd like to do something more for Jack," he said quietly. "Something that lasts beyond today." Emily, still overwhelmed by the day's events, nodded hesitantly. "You've already done so much just by being here." Morgan shook his head gently. "This is Jack's story, but I want to make sure it's one with a hopeful ending." The next morning, Emily awoke to the sound of her phone buzzing relentlessly. Messages and calls flooded in from friends, neighbors, and even strangers who had seen the photos and videos of Jack's lemonade stand. To her surprise, several messages mentioned a news segment aired late at night, highlighting Jack's story and Morgan Freeman's involvement. Curious, Emily quickly searched online and found clips from the broadcast. The reporter spoke passionately about Jack's resilience and bravery, framing him as an emblem of hope. Morgan's brief appearance, along with his heartfelt words about the power of community, amplified the story's reach. Social media was ablaze with hashtags like #Lemonade for Hope and Jack and Morgan, inspiring countless people to share their own stories of overcoming hardships. By mid-morning, cars began pulling up to their quiet street again. This time, it wasn't just neighbors. Strangers from nearby towns arrived, eager to donate or offer words of encouragement. Some brought supplies for the lemonade stand, while others handed Emily envelopes filled with cash. Local businesses even sent boxes of fresh lemons and sugar, ensuring Jack wouldn't run out anytime soon. Morgan returned that afternoon, as he had promised, carrying a small, leather-bound journal in hand. He approached Jack, who was setting up his stand for another day. "I brought you something," Morgan said, handing Jack the journal. "Write your story in here, Jack. Every detail. The world deserves to hear it someday." Jack beamed as he accepted the gift, his small hands running over the smooth cover. "Thank you, Mr. Freeman. I'll make sure to write everything." As the day unfolded, the energy around Jack's lemonade stand grew. A local bakery donated fresh pastries to sell alongside the lemonade, and a neighboring farmer brought crates of fruit. The once modest stand now buzzed with activity, becoming the heart of the community. Morgan stayed nearby, quietly observing the scene. His calm demeanor and occasional words of encouragement brought a sense of comfort to the chaos. When reporters arrived, eager to interview him, he waved them off gently. "This isn't about me," he said. "It's about Jack, his family, and what this town is doing together." Emily, overwhelmed by the outpouring of support, approached Morgan later in the day. "Mr. Freeman, I don't even know how to thank you," she said, her voice trembling. "You've given us more than we could have ever hoped for." Morgan smiled warmly. "You don't need to thank me. Jack's courage did this. Sometimes, the smallest acts spark the biggest changes." That evening, as the sun set over the horizon, the lemonade stand reached a milestone Emily could hardly believe. They had raised more than enough to cover Jack's medical bills. The donation jar, once just a hopeful idea, was now overflowing with contributions from people far and wide. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in streaks of orange and purple, the Andrews family gathered near the lemonade stand. Neighbors and strangers alike lingered, reluctant to leave after witnessing such an extraordinary day. The air buzzed with an energy that felt both celebratory and humbling. Jack, sitting on a stool near the stand, looked exhausted but content. His small hands clutched the now familiar mason jar labeled Jack's Journey. His mother knelt beside him, her eyes shining with tears of gratitude. Morgan Freeman approached them, his presence as steady and grounding as it had been all day. He crouched down to Jack's level, his kind eyes meeting the boy's. "You've done something incredible here today, Jack," he said. "You didn't just raise money. You brought people together. And that's something not many people can do." Jack smiled shyly, his cheeks tinged pink. "I just wanted to help my mom," he said softly. Morgan reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, leather-bound notebook. "This is for you," he said, handing it to Jack. "I want you to write down your dreams in here. Big or small, they all matter. And I have no doubt you'll achieve them." Jack turned the notebook over in his hands, the smooth leather warm from Morgan's touch. "Thank you, Mr. Freeman," he whispered, his voice filled with awe. Morgan smiled, patting Jack gently on the shoulder. "No, Jack. Thank you." As the crowd began to thin and the quiet hum of the evening settled in, Morgan Freeman lingered by the lemonade stand, his gaze fixed on Jack and his family. The scene before him was one of quiet triumph, a testament to resilience, community, and the enduring power of hope. Before he left, Morgan turned to Jack's mother. "I'd like to help in another way," he said, his voice low but purposeful. "I have friends who believe in supporting stories like Jack's. Don't be surprised if you get some calls in the coming days." Jack's mother, overwhelmed, clasped her hands to her chest. "Mr. Freeman, you've already done so much. I don't even know how to thank you." Morgan shook his head gently. The thanks belonged to Jack. He reminded all of us what courage looks like. As he prepared to leave, Jack ran up to him, clutching a cup of lemonade. "Mr. Freeman," he called out, handing the cup to him with a wide grin. "One for the road." Morgan chuckled, accepting the cup with a nod of gratitude. "Best lemonade I've ever had," he said with a wink, taking a slow sip. He waved goodbye as he walked toward his car, the distant sound of applause still echoing in the night air. As he drove away, the lights of the small town fading into the horizon, Morgan Freeman carried with him not just the memory of a remarkable boy, but the reaffirmation that even the smallest acts of kindness could ripple out to change the world.